In 2017, Emma Kelty, a 42-year-old British adventurer, decided to kayak down the full length of the Amazon River, alone. There's so many dangers associated with this type of adventure, but the one that's the most unpredictable is the red zone. This is an area infamous for drug traffickers, gangs, and river pirates. 2 months after Emma started her trip, she headed into the red zone, and shortly after, all communication from her suddenly stopped. There was no emergency call from her on the satellite phone, and her tracker, which pinged her location every 4 hours, showed absolutely no movement. Her friends and family were left wondering what happened to her. They were hoping she was in an area where communication was difficult and that they would hear from her soon. But they waited, and there was no word from Emma. And when they found out what happened to her, they realized that their worst fears had come true. This is the story of Emma Tamsin Kelty. Emma Kelty was born in 1974 in Finchley, North London. She grew up with 2 brothers and a sister, and they say that as a child they saw her adventurous spirit grow. Her childhood friends said that Emma never really chose the easy route like the rest of them did. And then at age 17, sadly, her mom died of cancer, and it really hit Emma hard, as you can imagine. The grief really affected her, and in a way it really seemed to change her. And this is the start of her path to constantly seeking out new and challenging adventures. And this way of life would start to become an obsession for her. After graduating university, she spent 3 years in a regiment of the British Army and even spent time on a mission in Germany. Now, she could have easily chosen a military career, but instead she wanted to follow her dream, and that was to become a school head teacher. She got her master's in deaf studies, and then her dream came true in 2013 when she was appointed head at Knollmead Primary School in London. Now, I'm getting most of my information from Emma. She kept a prolific online presence during the years when she started her adventures. She talked about her training plans, documented everything that she was doing, her future plans, and she also shared much of the criticism that she faced with when she talked about her adventures to others. And there was a lot of that, as you'll soon see. So while working at the school, Emma explored more of an adventurous lifestyle, kind of on the side while she was working full-time, which isn't always easy to do. She'd been out skydiving, cliff diving, kickboxing, and she even ran some ultramarathons. She also started rappelling down skyscrapers, and she took up the crazy sport of street luging. Emma had her first true solo adventure around this time. It was a 200-mile trek across the UK, and it was kind of an epiphany for her. It left a lasting impression, and Emma later said that life shifted in quite a profound way. And this was the start of Emma's total obsession with solo trips. Emma also had a fierce sense of humor, and there was a lot of moments when I was just killing myself laughing at some of her posts. There was one time when she was talking about a grueling race up the Welsh mountainside, and she recalled how her stomach was upset and she just had wicked cramps, and all she could think about during this ultramarathon was running to the toilet. And she was so focused on it that at the end of the race, she bypassed her medal and headed straight for the toilet. She said it was something that she never wanted to experience again, but she was pretty sure it got her to the end quicker. More tragedy followed in 2014 when Emma's father also passed away of cancer. She was absolutely devastated. She didn't speak too much about it online, but she did say that life is too short. But at least my father is reunited with my mother, but I miss them both greatly. And this is when her life shifted once again. If you've ever been through a parent's death, you know that it can be horrible. It's life-altering and devastating. There's so many words that I could fit in there. It's really something that people can be completely changed by. It's almost like you look at the world differently and your priorities may change. You look at mortality differently. You see how short life can be and how it can pass by so quickly. Sometimes the death of a parent can give people the impetus to live their own lives and live them more fully. And I think that's exactly what happened to Emma here. She was going to give life all that she had now. Following his death, she sold her flat and resigned from her job so she could commit full-time to her adventures, and that's a big deal because this was her dream job. One of her friends said during this time that Emma had a deep, deep sadness in not having her parents around anymore, so it drove her to take on these new adventures. And one of Emma's first adventures after her father's death was to head to one of her favorite places. It was in Scotland and was a peak that was about 3,700 feet high. And Emma just loves Scotland. She spent a lot of time there as a kid. This was about a 7 to 9 hour hike and is also the highest point in Western Scotland. And it was during this hike that Emma was met with this icy cold rain, and she said it just felt like needles through her clothing, and there was the chilly Scottish wind howling as she ascended. And now Emma had been on this mountain before and knew the risks, and as she got to about 2,700 feet, she stopped and said that there was these lifting winds that were not really good for ridge walking, as they could blow you right off the mountain. So it's worth noting at this point that Emma was not wildly reckless. It was something that she was accused of later on, but it simply wasn't true. She got a lot of criticism for her decisions, but it was evident early on that she took these risks pretty seriously and tried to mitigate them whenever she could. In 2015, Emma was ramping up her adventure game even more. She was trying to figure out what her next trip would be when she saw the film Wild. If you haven't seen it, Wild is a story about Cheryl Strayed, a woman who hiked the long, difficult Pacific Crest Trail in the US. Cheryl was struggling with a few difficult issues in life, the loss of her mother, drug addiction, she was going through a divorce, and she kind of wanted to hike the trail just to deal with that trauma. Emma was kind of in the same boat in that she was struggling with the death of her parents and just looking for a way to get through that. Another thing she wanted to do was a ski trip in Antarctica, of all places, but this was actually a childhood dream of hers. So these are two major trips that if somebody just did one a year, that would be plenty. But Emma wanted to do both of them in 2015, and that was her goal. On average, the Pacific Crest Trail takes about 5 months to hike, and Emma was looking at doing a little bit faster because she was in training for her Antarctica trip, so she wanted to do it in about 4 months. She was going to be pushing it, but because it was a training session, she was totally fine with that. And when she hit the trail, it was full of adventure and chaos, which you'll see was kind of Emma's experience in a lot of things she did. And I'm not knocking her, I end up in the same boat as her when I do things. Chaos just seems to follow some of us. But in the first few hundred miles, she took a few wrong turns, she hit a couple freak snowstorms, she got lost in the desert without water, she ran out of food, she had a lumpy mat that she didn't realize was that lumpy. But despite all of this, she said, "I think I'm doing well," which is just the absolute epitome of positive thinking. Emma finished the Pacific Crest Trail in just over the 4 months she was aiming for, and she was totally ecstatic. She made it, and she was sad it was over, but she was already looking forward to that next adventure in Antarctica. Emma wanted to be added to the exclusive list of only 13 British women who had ever skied to the South Pole. But there was one little snag for skiing months to the pole, and that was that Emma had never skied before. Lack of skill didn't deter her from trying something new. In fact, almost everything she did was trying something new. So off Emma went to New Zealand to train on a glacier. She wanted to kind of simulate the conditions that she would have on her Antarctica trip. And that was her training for the trip. During this time, she attended a talk at the Royal Geographical Society and said, "The evening was filled with heroic people sharing their story, but also the hard-nosed reality of the potential cost to life on those expeditions." The theme of death was repeated throughout the evening, and as Emma says, I guess it was their way of bringing the room back down to the ground and giving the young hopefuls a sense of responsibility and reality. And talking about her own mortality, which she didn't do a lot of, but at this point she did say that she has thought about dying, and the best she can do is to minimize the risks. She said, "In many ways I am lucky. I have no dependents or job, so it makes the rest of the thinking easier." And 6 short weeks later, Emma was on her way to Antarctica. For most of her trips, Emma was raising money for charities, and this time it was for cystic fibrosis and Teach Africa. She also did fundraising for cancer on some of her other trips. This first trip to Antarctica would be with a guide in preparation to do it solo the following year. She finished this trip strong and elated, and a year later she was actually doing it solo. And the solo trip was to be an out and back trip that would take up to 5 months, and no solo woman had ever done the round trip, so Emma was super excited to possibly be the first. But it started off like Emma's other trips, with a bit of chaos and problems that she didn't see coming. She almost got deported back to the UK. She had multiple travel delays, which is kind of the way it goes when you're traveling to the South Pole. She had whiteouts, gusts of extreme winds, and despite all of these crazy things, her attitude was still positive. I sometimes don't know how she kept it to be so positive. I think I would have crumpled up into a ball at some of those moments. And she said with her positive attitude, I have to say, I kind of like it. I never really liked the standard challenge. And you got to admit, she was pretty tough, tougher than most people. 5 days in, she had an issue with her fuel canister, which meant that she couldn't do the trip solo anymore. And this was a huge blow to her, but she continued on and finished the one-way leg. Emma was uber emotional when she skied the final leg and touched that ceremonial silver ball, which is the mark of the South Pole. She finished that first leg in great spirits, but just couldn't do the return trip at all. She was healthy despite having a case of polar thigh, which is a really nasty, gross injury, which is due to prolonged exposure to cold. And she also had a lung infection. She said, I have loved this solo challenge, and it has given me the confidence to look at some more extreme places in the world to try. So the journey is not over. For those reading this who may be disheartened, don't be. I'm not a professional. I don't work in the industry. I'm just a simple plain Jane who likes to give things a go. And this statement is so telling in that Emma kind of underestimates her accomplishments so far. Emma explained all the things that she loved about the trip, and that was being in Antarctica, the travel, and how she really felt like a true adventurer and explorer. And in that moment, she really was. She proved that she deserved to be there. 3 short weeks after the South Pole solo trip, Emma had already put that expedition behind her and was looking for her next adventure. Since a cold, barren place didn't break her, she thought, maybe the opposite would do it. And what's the opposite of cold? Well, hot and muggy. And that's where the Amazon River idea popped up. She said it's a place that's hot, humid, teeming with dangerous wildlife and people with machetes and guns and moving water. I will be kayaking down the Amazon River from source to sea, all 4,000 miles of it. Emma was aiming to do it solo, but said that she might have an interpreter with her to help with the notorious sections and help negotiate deals and getting through dangerous areas, but really wasn't sure what she was going to do yet. Like her Antarctica trip, Emma had very little of the technical skills that were needed for a trip of this magnitude. She was looking at paddling over 4,000 miles, but had little paddling experience and absolutely zero whitewater experience. And that whitewater experience is a must because the first 500 miles of the trip is whitewater rapids. There were huge walled-in canyons, and there was no escape if she fell out of her boat. And some of the rapids were even class 5 rapids, which are considered expert level, so way out of Emma's league. In February 2017, then barely back just a few weeks from Antarctica, Emma dove into her intense training regimen for the Amazon, and she wanted to go that June, which did not leave a lot of time. So she thought that the best way to learn fairly quickly would be learning from experienced paddlers. She reached out to the local kayaking community and found some mentors to teach her the basics. Developing the required skills actually takes years, but she only had these few months to prepare. Because of this short timeline, Emma faced some criticism and a bit of judgment from others. She acknowledged that it was ambitious, but she also said that those people didn't know her, her history, or what she could accomplish during her training. She said, "Yes, this is a very familiar scenario, echoed with every adventure that I do." She was constantly getting criticized, and it was starting to bother her. But no one deterred her, and she continued to train. She trained with experienced people and tried to simulate the conditions that she might see on that trip. And she actually mastered the skills at an impressive speed thanks to demanding courses at a local canoe club. Her instructor, Graham Simmons, says she was fiercely determined but certainly not foolhardy. We see a lot of adrenaline junkies, but Emma was not that type. She had calculated the risks and done everything to minimize them. He was confident that she could handle the kayaking aspect of the trip, but they both knew that that would be the least of her worries. Graham said that the biggest risks were the lawlessness of the area and just how vulnerable a lone woman would be on the Amazon. So to help mitigate this risk, Emma took some self-defense classes and firearms training to prepare. As for her goals for the trip, well, this is an interesting and really important look into her mindset before she left. She said the trip could be 2 weeks, 6 months, or maybe something in between. There's no time pressure, no world record, no competition. There's no pressure of even completing it. Who knows? Who cares? Because that's the adventure this time, and I can't wait to experience the folks, culture, environment, and life along the River Amazon. Emma finally decided on her plan just before she left, and she would have a guide for the rapids, and then she'd continue the remaining about 3,500 miles alone. Let's talk about the mighty Amazon River. The Amazon River from source to sea is 4,000 miles long and has its beginnings high in the Andes of Peru. The mountains act as a wall blocking the warm, moist air moving in, resulting in heavy, persistent rainfall that consistently feeds the Amazon's headwater. The river then makes its way east through thousands of miles of rainforest and lowlands until it empties into the Atlantic Ocean on the northeast coast of Brazil. The Amazon River system meanders through 9 South American countries and provides 20% of the ocean's fresh water supply. Indigenous people live in approximately 28% of the basin, and this includes 350 different ethnic groups, with more than 60 of these remaining essentially isolated. The Amazon River is home to more than 5,600 species of fish, including 100 species of electric fish, which freak me the hell out, and 60 species of piranhas. I thought there was 1 species of piranhas, but there's 60 to look out for. So there's other animals to be wary of. There's anacondas, there's tarantulas, those pesky piranhas, and even the most dangerous shark, the bull shark, who thrives in both salt and freshwater, so you can't really escape it. There's also poisonous dart frogs who are so toxic that they can cause heart failure within minutes in a human, so that's great. But in all seriousness, there's something more dangerous and unpredictable than all the animals and the water and everything, and that's humans. There's 2 extremely dangerous sections of the Amazon River controlled by those smuggling goods, trafficking drugs, and just out to steal things from other people. In 2013, the first and still only woman to have kayaked the whole route from source to sea was Darcy Gechter, and she successfully paddled from source to sea in a group of 3, herself and 2 guys. She wrote a fantastic book called Amazon Women about her adventure. It gives great insight into the challenge, the beauty, and the dangers of paddling the Amazon River, particularly for a woman. The infamous red zone is the one dangerous area that Emma would be paddling solo through. And Darcy describes it in her book as a loosely defined geographical region that is infamous for violence, drug trafficking, and illegal logging. She went so far as to cut off her hair to not bring attention to her being a female. And her trip was so frightening in areas, they had the Navy guiding them. Like, they literally had a Navy ship beside them, down the river with them, nonstop. And she was still terrified at certain moments where there was sketchy groups that came by. So you can imagine going without that kind of guard by you. It would be terrifying. Tourists have been murdered in this area so often that Darcy says she would never attempt the trip again. On June 18, 2017, Emma and her guides started making their way to the source of the Amazon River. One day in, she posed with a woman and a baby and said, "This has already been more about the kayaking, the folks, the sounds, smells, food, communication, views, just to name a few. Just the way I love it." 5 days after the start of her journey, Emma put a cryptic post on Facebook saying there may be changes ahead. And then she went on to say that she may soon go solo, which was totally against her plans. She doesn't really dive into details, but did say that it was just a thought then, but for folks that know me, freedom is important. Now, it's a little hazy on what she meant because Emma really never clarified it. But in reading about her trip and the guides later on, I did see that they said that she clashed with one of the guides from the start. And he made her hike this really long section that was a rapid section, and he just thought her skills were not enough to handle that section. And that could have made her mad, who really knows. But regardless, Emma must have worked things out with them because she did keep the guides throughout the whole rapid section. But when she was able to ditch them, she was pretty happy. On July 25th, she was done with the guides. It was her last day before she was to go solo, and she said, "The rapids have finished, and no, I didn't die." Emma swapped out the whitewater boat for her touring kayak, and she was on her way alone. She fashioned a tracker to her kayak, which would ping every 4 hours to share her location with her family and friends who were watching her and watching out for her. And she was off. Finally, after months of hearing people tell her that she couldn't do it and it couldn't be done, she was off to prove them wrong. She was on her trip alone now. Her first day of going solo went really well, and she met some great folks along the way who were kind of surprised by her journey. Yet she said they were all really lovely and kind to her. She also saw her first river dolphins, which if you haven't seen them, here they are. They're like weird little pink grayish creatures, but it must have been so cool to see them off of the side of her boat. And then on August 11th, after all these months, Emma was finally on the Amazon River proper. After months of being in tributaries, she finally hit the Amazon River, the river of her dreams. As she paddled down the Amazon, Emma said she saw more people and it got busier, to the point that boats started circling the islands as she was camped on, as people were really curious as to who this paddler was. But at this time, she didn't really seem concerned for her safety, more just annoyed that she was kind of center stage. 10 days later, she went from being in Peru to being in Brazil, and it was a bad day where nothing really seemed to go right for her. There was thunderstorms, they just kept getting worse, and she went the wrong way and had to backtrack a few times. And then she saw a small beach on the opposite side of the river, and she was going to paddle to it because she was pretty tired and wanted to just rest for the night. So she paddled hard upstream, and then when she got there, she saw a man waving a machete and ravens eating what he had just killed. She quickly paddled away, but he was shouting at her, and this really unnerved Emma, obviously. Crazy man waving a machete. But the next day, she heard the sounds of something even worse, rapid gunfire. She wasn't sure what was going on, but said, "Something is a-stirring." Now, most of us probably would have freaked out with the gunfire, and I know I would have stopped my trip right there and been like, "Machete, gunfire, no, bye, see ya, Amazon." That would have been it. But Emma maybe she was just starting to get used to all the craziness happening around her, but she didn't ever talk about stopping. She might have gotten used to it, and she certainly expected it, but and at the same time she was kind of joking about it too. But I don't know if the joking was actually serious or if it was just kind of a way of dealing with that internal stress that she had about her safety. During this, Emma wasn't sleeping well at night, and this made her more and more tired during the day, so it was really difficult to paddle. 2 weeks after this, she was beyond tired. She was now admitting to actually being uneasy with the people wandering by because it just didn't stop. She couldn't function during the day and just couldn't sleep at all, so she was kind of a mess. On the rare occasion where it was quiet, she was still probably so nervous that she just couldn't sleep. She also was enduring crazy weather, and there were storms that were so severe they were lifting the tent off the ground. But by early September, Emma's positive thinking might have helped because her spirits actually rose, and she seemed to be getting into a bit of a groove after having a few good days. She said, "The last couple of days paddling was just what I imagined it to be. Now I am sitting on my private beach in the sun, so quiet and just perfect." On September 6th, Emma was more than halfway through her trip and was absolutely elated, like she's halfway through her dream, and things were actually going okay. On September 10th, Emma was enjoying her deserted beach and one of her favorite curry dinners. Later that night, she posted an ominous note. "So in or near Kauai, 100 kilometers away, I will have my boat stolen and I will be killed too. Nice." Now, this crazy statement may have come from a conversation she had with some villagers earlier. A student later spoke out and said that they saw Emma paddling down the river and called her over. The student said, "I told her it was very dangerous, that it was full of drug trafficking and terrorists. She thanked me and took a photo of us. Then I said, 'Good luck,' and she said the same." I still remember her last words. "I can't stay. The more time I stay, the more time I'm losing. For me to succeed, I have to do this route. Your hearts are very kind, but I have to carry on." So Kind of confuses me here is that the contradiction from what Emma said at the start of the trip as to the way she's thinking now. Earlier on, there was no pressure. It was just whatever. I might go 2 days. I might go 6 weeks. We'll see when I finish or if I even do. Now it's like there's this really crazy bit of information that you could be murdered. The likelihood is high of you getting injured or worse. And that's a local there telling her this. But for some reason, her brain just didn't want to pick up on that. Or I don't know what was going through her brain. I'm not her. But why did she keep going after this terrifying bit of information came forward? It's pretty mind-boggling. This area is one of the 2 most dangerous areas along the Amazon River. It's infamous for pirates, drug runners, and just straight-up criminals who don't hesitate to murder someone just to steal from them. The area is practically lawless, and being so remote, law enforcement just can't keep up with all the crime. 2 days later, Emma posted on September 12th, "I'm in the clear, all okay." This was a huge relief to her followers and to her friends and family. Later on that same day, she said, "Today started fighting my way through 20 kilometers of storms, got through town no problem, and just took a sigh of relief, and then turned a corner and found 50 guys in motorboats with arrows. My face must have been a picture. Town was uber quiet, too quiet, all good." There's so much to unpack from that statement, and it's a huge range of emotions, from fighting storms, physically challenging days, to having relief and then fear again. It's just a ton for her to deal with all alone. It must have been overwhelming for Emma. Understandably, that rattled her followers, but Emma wasn't really responding to anyone at this time. She was probably even worse in terms of being sleep deprived, and the situation was getting scarier and riskier by the minute. She saw more groups of men with weapons, more than she had on her entire trip, and she had to know that things were escalating. On September 13th, she said, "Finished the day yesterday, meeting 3 lovely locals and 2 kittens that slept next to my tent for the night." At 1 a.m., such a dramatic change in one day, but such is the river. Every kilometer is different, and just because one area is bad doesn't mean the next is. And that was Emma's last post. On September 14th, Emma was sleeping in her tent after setting it up on a small island on the upper stretches of the Amazon River in Brazil. This is the exact area that the student had warned her about just days earlier. As she was sleeping, a gang of 7 drug users who called themselves the Water Rats were boating up the river looking to steal from anyone they came across. And they saw Emma's tent perched on the island. They didn't know immediately who it belonged to, but they assumed it was a Colombian with drugs, as they were common in this area, and this was a high drug trafficking section of the river. So they boated up to the island, and then the gang got out of their boat. They ran up to the tent and started screaming, firing their guns, and shooting from about 50 meters away. Emma was apparently woken by the gunfire and then was hit in the arm. She got up and ran out of the tent, waving frantically and screaming for help. Unfortunately, the only people around were these guys. There was no one else who could help her. Now, accounts of this story are from the men themselves, and the stories weren't really consistent. One said that they cut off her hair with a knife and demanded to know where the drugs were. Another said that they assaulted her and cut her throat before taking her out to the river and dumping her in it, hoping the animals would take care of her body. Some locals say that they saw Emma still alive in the boat before she was thrown in the fast-moving river, but there's really been no other confirmations of exactly what happened that night. And in the end, the details of that exact moment really don't make much of a difference. The fact remains that Emma's adventures sadly ended there. The men stole all of Emma's stuff and took a knife to her kayak in an effort to sink it so it would never be found. Soon after, these dumbasses accidentally activated the SOS call on her GPS device as they tried to figure out how to use it. And this emergency call immediately made its way to Brazilian authorities, who launched a search and headed to the exact location where Emma was attacked. But it was too late. They found her tent, a few clothes, and her shoes, but that was it. A few days later, they found her kayak a little bit further down the river, but no trace of Emma. The Brazilian Navy continued its search of the river for Emma's body for months, but it was never found. According to the deputy chief of police, this gang operates like pirates, and they went out looking for a chance just to steal from someone that night, and it didn't matter what it was, if it was drugs, money, or goods. Emma had no chance when this gang spotted her that night. Police arrested a few of the men, and they found out that another, the ringleader of the attack, was killed in a rival gunfight only like a week later after Emma was attacked. Ray Mears is a popular survival specialist who discussed Emma's situation, and he said that even for seasoned explorers, she was in an area that was one of the most dangerous on Earth. The danger for the travelers, the equipment they're carrying, and the clothing on their backs, it makes them appear affluent, and therefore a target for people who are poor. Being on her own there, she'd have been incredibly vulnerable. He said that he's traveled to very remote parts of the world and found himself in tricky situations and had to deal with people who could be hostile. Experience teaches you a great deal. He said that he really admired Emma's spirit and her desire to push herself as much as she did. Later, one of her guides said that Emma's lust for adventure just meant that she had the boldness to embark on a journey that few can muster the courage for. So that's a story of Emma Kelty. Let me know what you think of it. I think that it's a little bit more complicated than her just being reckless. Some people accuse her of being stupid, and she was neither reckless or stupid. She was an adventurer at heart and just felt this urge to explore the world and deal with all the trauma that she'd been through in her life. This is her way of doing it. And that just has inherent risks. And those close to Emma later said that she would have made the trip even if she knew the ending. In fact, Emma herself said before she started down the Amazon, "No matter what happens, I have no regrets." So I still wonder if she experienced something like summit fever or something that mountain climbers get. So it's that drive or compulsion to get to the top of the peak. You get so close to the top of Mount Everest that certain people just can't stop and turn around and do the rational thing that will save their lives. Instead, they just have to keep going because they can't think beyond that summit. They have to conquer it, regardless of what the consequences are. So did Emma have that for the Amazon River? Did she get, halfway through and think that I can't stop now? I'm almost halfway through this epic trip. I'll be the first woman to ever do this alone, and I can't stop now. Maybe, maybe not. No one can really say. And it's a tragic, tragic ending to her life, but she also accomplished so much in her life and helped inspire others to do the same. Emma's mantra was, "Don't put off till tomorrow what you can do today," and I know that resonates with a lot of people. Anyways, thanks so much for watching. Stay tuned as I have a lot more adventures gone wrong. There is never an end to bad decision making when people are out on adventures, so stick around. Be sure to hit that like button and subscribe to get notified when I post. We'll see you next time.